Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me, Globe Events, today. I am very excited to have this conversation all about this film that was sponsored and created by Every Mother Counts, and with this incredible filmmaker. To start, Nicole, if you would introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about yourself as a filmmaker.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. And thanks, Boston GlobeDocs, for having us. Every Mother Counts as well, because this is, my name's Nicole McKinley Hahn. I'm a filmmaker. And we're talking today about Giving Birth in America, Arkansas, which is a project from Every Mother Counts, which is a nonprofit organization founded by Christy Turlington Burns, with a mission to make pregnancy and childbirth safe everywhere for everyone.
Excellent. And now this is the seventh film in a series sponsored by Every Mother Counts. Can you describe generally like what these films are trying to do? You know, how this kind of fits in with the broader project and the broader series?
Yes, it is the seventh. It's I've worked on 4 of them, and the seventh is the Arkansas one that we just mentioned. They all cover this very similar issues in the sense of maternal health, and that it's about throughout the United States, we're the highest resource country with the worst maternal mortality death rate. So that is definitely a consistent theme in all the films, sadly. And then there's each film covers sort of a different, some of the practitioners, some of the moms, sometimes both, sometimes the little bit extends to the family members. But what is, I think, most common is that it's putting a face to the statistics of maternal health in all the films, whether you're a practitioner or whether you're the mother or, a birthing person.
And how did you get connected with this project as a filmmaker? You mentioned you've been involved in a couple of these different films, but your work as a filmmaker extends beyond that. And so how did you get connected with this organization and with this project in particular?
That's a great question. I mean, I did meet Christy like 20 years ago almost in Swaziland. So that's how I got introduced to her work, but she hadn't founded Every Mother Counts yet. So I think now it's been 15 years. This is the 15th year of Every Mother Counts. So I'd say like every year I do a project with them. They do many, many projects, but I'm one of the filmmakers that gets to work with them. And I think that's how I met and have been consistently working with the organization over the years.
Wow. And I'm curious how this work, with Every Mother Counts, with an advocacy organization, that's telling stories within an advocacy lens, how that work differs from some of the other work you've done in the past. Like, does it uh, change how you go into the project or the stories you're trying to tell or the thesis you have behind a project? Or maybe documentary filmmaking is the same in every respect. Like, are there differences to doing work within this kind of organization?
Definitely. I mean, as a documentary filmmaker, it takes longer and sometimes a couple of years just to do like the research phase of a project. And what really is quite interesting about working with Every Mother Counts is when they start a film project, they already have a team that is researchers, policymakers, experts. They have quite a team, and also understand the states they're working in and the other locations they're working in outside of the United States in a way that would just take so long for a filmmaker to gain access to that knowledge and that expertise. And so it's really like actually lovely to have this support when you start a project with them, because you already go into it with a lot of knowledge base and being able to almost have like all these advisors and experts in that topic. And then it even gets
Wow.
more, you know, as they focus into something that they want to talk about with maternal health, either the issue based or a storyline, you also have just a farther reach, and you're already able to do a lot of expert interviews right away because they have the access to practitioners and understand that. And it's a process. We could talk more about that process, but it's a process.
Wow. So as you enter into a project like this, how are you approaching it? Like, given that background work, given that breadth of expertise, given the knowledge base that this is based off of, I mean, do you know general themes that the organization hopes to focus on, or does that evolve as you film and as you find people?
It's a bit of both. Like I think
Mm.
there is usually some sort of location, like say they pick a state. And so with Arkansas, this film, we kind of already knew going into it, we were going to focus on the third term or postpartum, like, and not focus on capturing the birth, but focus on the moms and the 6 weeks to a few months postpartum after the birth. And so that is different for this film. But as we started meeting the mothers and meeting the practitioners and advocates on the ground in Arkansas, things start to change, and you develop relationships with the subjects in the film and the participants in the film, and that always changes. It changes what you thought you were going to do. As documentary films always are a bit more, you have to go with the flow.
Yeah, be agile depending on what happens in the on the ground. And so how do you find subjects as well? And even once you've found them, how do you build trust to have these kind of vulnerable conversations on sensitive topics? I don't know if the background work the organization does helps to kind of form the foundation for that, if they've already found people, or how you were involved in that process as a filmmaker.
Yeah, it's a great question. It definitely helps, obviously, to have the introductions on the ground right away with whether it's a birthing center or OBGYN, practitioners. Sometimes they already know of moms or other doulas or, people who might sort of want to participate, because that's really
Mhm.
the first sort of hurdle is actually when you're real people casting, is to see like who really wants to also participate. It's so
Mm.
sometimes you might, the best sort of like, I don't know, approach is not necessarily to you want to do a lot of Zooms. You want to get to know them, to build relationships. And that we'll do a few months before we even start filming. We'll just start. And Christy's even involved in a lot of the, first connections, I'd say, and developing relationships. And then the team will do a scouting trip, and that starts to really form the relationships even more. And again, like you kind of just hope that people want to participate, and then that's how you gain their trust, is actually going and meeting with them and talking, um, beyond the casting. When you actually start filming, the trust does need to continue building that trust. And so we'll like eat, make meals, cook with them after we film, put the cameras away, and still like the best thing to ever do is to cook a meal, be with the family or the mom. And even the practitioners will invite us like to go do something, go on a run. Sometimes we'll try to get some exercise in because we've been, early mornings and traveling. And but playtime, also having some playtime with your participants in any filmmaking, I think really helps with, developing the trust and some kind of like relationship.
That's great. As a journalist myself too, it's something that we encounter as well, though I can't say I've ever gone on runs to build trust with the source. I'd be open to cooking and eating. Those are I'm okay with those activities, but running, not so much. So good for you. Um, speaking too as my like own experience as a journalist, I often find myself capturing people in the midst, of experiencing hardship. Often that's why we're there. We're trying to showcase, bear witness to something that is happening that is often challenging or unpleasant. Um, And that's something that I struggle with as a journalist. Bearing witness to someone's challenges, they might be still in the midst of the challenges and not really in a position to help them or provide resources to them. It's more an advocacy on their behalf. And I'm curious, within this organization, like are you or other producers able to connect people to resources, able to connect moms to resources, or is the work similar to my experience in that you're focused on broader reforms, bearing witness to these challenges? The advocacy work of Every Mother Counts is kind of a step removed from some of the kind of interpersonal relationships with the people in your films.
It's similar probably to journalism, in that way, that you mentioned in the question. That I think there's a lot of ways that I think anyone participating in the film, whether you're on camera, off camera, have benefited from the tools. There's a lot of introductions. So I could go into like an anecdote about one of the moms in the film, Ashley. She is a great example, and there's probably each film there's an example of this, where they were a little more isolated. They didn't have necessarily the access to support for whatever reason, like the father's not involved and there's not much what we call like a culture of care, some way for there to be a network of support. Whereas the other two moms in the film, you can see, have doulas, and they are they're working with Ujima, the network there, for a doula network. And so there's a lot of discrepancies between the subjects, but there's also a lot of similarities. But one that I think the lack of access in each person's story is similar. But with Ashley, she actually ended up needing support from Ujima in that film after we finished and wrapped the film. And she wanted to, because she had had a cesarean birth, she wanted to be able to have a VBAC for her next child. They got pregnant and now has two children, but she successfully was able to have a VBAC because she was able to, for her second child, which is not in the film because it's like a couple of years later, but she
Wow.
actually was able to get a lot of support and resources just by working with us, and then also having other maternal health organizations and including Every Mother Counts, to support. And because she's the one who was driving an hour and a half for her prenatal visits. And that's far.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Does that
incredible. Well,
answer the question? Like
yeah,
there's also
yeah. So
toolkits, which I can talk about at the end, that helps.
yeah, well, go ahead, go into them now. What kind of
Well, on the website, there's actually like a guide, and other groups, you can download the guide, watch the film, whether you're an educator or a birthing center or just interested in maternal health, or maybe advocating for your family member or yourself. And you can actually use the toolkit and learn so much. It's really fantastic. It kind of walks you through everything. It's amazing.
yeah, so even just having an awareness of the organization by virtue of working with this film, people are gaining access to resources and toolkits and further supports.
Yes.
That's incredible.
We stay in touch
Um,
with moms, and a lot of the practitioners end up sort of collaborating with Every Mother Counts in other ways as well, that I've noticed throughout the years.
that's great. It's really a jumping off point for the reforms and the broader work that the film is trying to bring awareness to. The thing what struck me too watching this was some of the universality of the issues that you capture. I mean, you cover it in Arkansas, but I mean, to many degrees, a lot of these things are happening everywhere. But at the same time, each of the kind of 7 films so far in this series is focused on a particular state. And I'm curious, as someone who's worked on multiple of these, is there a through line that kind of connects all these birthing mothers, or themes that show up again and again, even though it's focused on different states with maybe discrete access issues within each of those states?
Now my brain, it's like there's so many things. I'm like, do I talk about Medicaid? Do I talk about that? It's sad that the broad thing is that all maternal deaths, pretty much almost 100% of them are preventable. So that's like universal around the world, certainly here in the United States, we're, as I said, the most high resource country with the worst statistics and maternal mortality rate. So sadly, that's universal. And also the Medicaid, the lack of access, these sort of like medical deserts where you don't have access to not just a clinic, but actual like an OBGYN. But Medicaid has gotten better, I think. I'm not an expert on this, but Arkansas is one of the only states that did not extend Medicaid beyond the 60 days for mothers and maternal health. So that's a big problem. I think even sometimes it's 6 weeks, and
Wow.
family leave. I could go off on family leave. There's a lot of issues around the family leave, lack of family leave, for many families, mothers. Is there
I'm
something
curious.
you also,
No, I mean that those are I guess just the challenges of like it doesn't even matter the circumstances, like the the broad theme is almost universally that motherhood is hard. Like it is exceptionally hard. And there are all these different things that make it harder uh, when it's this fundamental aspect of many of our lives. I mean, and then we wonder, why do we have like declining birthing rates and why are women having children later in life? I mean, we just look at kind of the aspects of what's happening in all these different states. Um, I'm wondering if in covering these things kind of from a state by state basis, if that emphasizes the need to have broader reforms, or if it's perhaps focused, state by state because it's just more realistic to have state by state reforms. Like, because if Medicaid is such an issue nationwide, if I think it was 30 states have passed Medicaid reforms or provide Medicaid beyond 60 days, we still have 20 that don't. And so I'm curious, just from a filmmaking approach, uh, if how that kind of nationwide aspect of this challenge is presented. Like, is it more realistic to focus on this state by state, or why not do a nationwide look at these issues, kind of issue by issue?
Yeah, I think with Every Mother Counts, they definitely do both in their work. The films, I think, are more specific because of being able to partner with certain practitioners and groups on the ground that then they feel they can make the most impact with. And because the laws are actually different in each state, there's some even, it can get really complicated, but even being a certified midwife practitioner, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of sort of different laws around each state. So I think like in the New Mexico film, we focused on 2 different midwives, Native American, and one, and the mother had a great experience with her midwife, but that midwife also couldn't practice, I think, there or Chicago. Like there's Illinois, I should say, as a state. And so there was complications around the state by state. And so sometimes it's easier to just focus on what's going on in that region, in that state. Then you'll find, yes, there's similarities, like postpartum, is so universal. And I think that's why we ended up focusing on this film on the postpartum. And
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that too. Like there is an explicit focus here. I mean, clinicians have a voice here and talk about, the broader aspects of some of these challenges, but the focus on the stories is on the mothers. What did you hope to portray by focusing on moms in particular, as opposed to clinician stories as some of the other films have?
yeah, it's definitely film by film with that question. With this one, knowing we were going to work on the, cover and sort of highlight the postpartum experience. It was definitely both. We wanted to cover the advocate, which is in this film, the doulas and family members. So it was kind of twofold, where we wanted to see what it was, the relationship between the two, and not only having an advocate, but learning how to advocate for yourself. And, you know, that does relate to the postpartum experience because it's so isolating for many mothers. So yeah, I think with the other films have focused just on the practitioner, more so, and the mother not as much, but it really depends on how, like I said earlier, how as a storyteller, you start to put the face to the issues and what makes the most sense for that story, you know, who's willing to be on camera the most. There's a lot of, you know, sort of parts that have to align. And I think the best part about the Arkansas film was that we got to actually really see it work. You know, there's a lot of focus on the just a lot of, you know, sad stories and you know, just underrepresented. There's a lot of, you know, I think the hardest part about making the films in general is watching the despair, you know, being in it. But when you see the hope and you see that people are working through it and there's actually like good outcomes, that's amazing.
Um, the subject too of postpartum support groups is featured predominantly in the film. Um, I mean, it's clear that that was present for some women and not for others. And I related to it so deeply because um, just from my personal experience, having experienced postpartum depression, the support group I joined 2 weeks postpartum saved me in many ways, but it wasn't even something that was on my radar. It was something that a friend suggested to my husband almost out of desperation because my husband just didn't know what else to do. Um, and so I'm curious, like how the women in the film were able to find those services, and if you saw a difference between women who had that access versus the experience of those who didn't.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, I'm glad you found that resource. And I would like to ask you a couple questions about your
Yes,
experience.
please. Oh, let's do it back and forth. Love it.
You know, that's you're right here, and you're experience. You know, you're a mother and experienced postpartum. Um, yeah, we definitely. I can say that like every time someone has worked with us or has been introduced around some of the issues in the film, especially with the guidance and all the experts, the expert interviews. I mean, I sometimes go back and listen to them as podcasts. Like I have the access to them, you know, and they're not published because a lot of in a 20-minute film, you know, you might shoot so much material, 50 hours of material, which even just 20 hours of that could be expert interviews, other
Mm.
practitioners, other types of you know, not just midwives and practitioners, but other experts in the field that might not even be maternal health. And my point is that, you know, you learn a lot, and there's so many. Every time we work through those interviews, you see that someone starts crying, someone has a story, everyone is experiencing something with maternal health, whether it's their grandmother or their mom or their, you know, sister, or, you know, everyone has a connection to this. So tell me about you though. Tell me how it was for you to actually engage in that group.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I experienced postpartum depression was that, I was suicidal despite having a ream of supports. I mean, a supportive and present husband, supportive parents that lived nearby and were helping with the childcare. This was my first child, and so I only was caring for one child at a time. Like I had so many things working for me, and didn't suffer from depression prior to giving birth. And so this wasn't even something that was on my radar. But having experienced that, what I found was that even though it's like either your 6 or 8 week postpartum depression, postpartum screening, they do ask you, in this impersonal survey, like what are you feeling? Do you feel like you might harm yourself or harm others? For me, my symptoms had resolved even prior to that appointment. Like my crisis period was prior to that. And in the midst of a crisis, I didn't feel worthy of reaching out for support. And the thing that struck me too watching this film was that women constantly had to advocate for themselves. They constantly had to reach out. They talk about, you know, their medication that they were taking in order to deal with mental health challenges, reaching out for supports. And then even for me, like connecting with a support group was almost something I like scoffed at initially. I was like, a support group, like, you know, in my head, I connected support groups with like people who were grieving or who were going through some kind of like life challenge. I didn't associate that with motherhood. And it was never suggested to me by like a clinician or any of the birthing classes we attended, or even I hired a doula. I had and paid out of pocket for a doula experience. And even that wasn't enough to help me in that moment. And so I'm curious, like, is self-advocacy and what you filmed and the women you spoke to, is that the only way that these women are able to deal with the broken system? That they have to advocate for themselves, reach out for those supports. I mean, and that to me has implications for women who might be in the midst of a depressive episode and unable to. But is that kind of the ground floor of what we're working with?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm so glad you did get support. And thanks for sharing that. I think what you're asking is a tough one because I think there's so many stigmas, just even what you just said with your own experience. That's the number one thing I also experienced when you said, oh, what's sort of broad across all the states. And especially as a filmmaker, and I'm sure you see it as a journalist, you go into people's lives, into their homes, and you start to culturally, you see their culture. And
Mm,
every culture has stigmas around certain, maternal women in general, women and women's health, and then maternal health, it gets even more complicated. Like we worked a little bit with the Marshallese community in Arkansas, northern Arkansas, and really wanted to have one of the moms and one of the educators that does home visits be in the film. But that was like, we filmed a couple of days with them and that was amazing, but it was like its own film because there's just so much that they were sharing around what you just asked about, like this idea of how do women get support,
mm,
outside of when they're not sometimes culturally even allowed to. They have to like ask someone in the family. They have to get permissions. Um, so I do think this idea of advocating for yourself is the first step, but there needs to be support, there needs to be resources, there needs to be access.
yeah. Um, I also wanted to talk about reproductive rights. So often we have conversations about reproductive services within a conversation of reproductive rights, but this film was more focused on the services available rather than the policies around reproductive freedom. And I'm curious of that decision. I mean, maybe the bounds of this project were focused on, you know, postpartum supports, and so reproductive freedom is something that is separate and apart. Um, Perhaps it added too much complexity. Like, was that a discussion of whether to involve um, broader conversations about abortion policies, access to birth control? I mean, all the things that kind of come before a pregnancy. I don't know if that was something that was discussed or came up in filming.
Yeah, with reproductive rights, it definitely wasn't a discussion for this film, but it's always a discussion with Every Mother Counts, and it's part of their, maternal health. The I think they say like, um, maternal rights are human rights. I think it's something like that. I don't can check out their Instagram. Every Mom Counts. It's important what you're asking, and I think we all should be, you know, morally and advocating and defending reproductive rights. So, but it just wasn't a topic, an issue to cover in the Arkansas film. Trying to think of the other films. I know some touch on it because of the mom will speak of it,
Mm.
something to do, it could be just as simple as family planning, and it's part of the discussion. But yeah, not much further than that in these films.
The other thing I want to ask about is teen pregnancy. So one of the women talked briefly about wanting a different experience than when she had been a teen mom. I mean, here's a woman who spoke about the challenges of postpartum, even having experienced what is often considered perhaps a more challenging environment of having a baby as a teen. I mean, so first of all, it struck me that these challenges of motherhood persist even when a woman isn't a teenager, even when she has the support. And I didn't know if that was intentional to try to find a woman who had been a teen mom, or if that was a happenstance of filming and finding this particular person.
Are you talking about Ashley, the in the film? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think she's teen. She's definitely older. She looks
She
young.
had a son who she had mentioned she had been a teen mom. Maybe it wasn't Ashley, the second woman that was profiled in the film.
Right. Yes, Wendy is
Yes.
she had her first child. She was a teen mom. Yes,
Yes. Yeah.
we didn't film in this film, but she did she did say that she was 10 years between her son and then her daughter, who we filmed a little bit in the film. Um, Charlie is her name. It's so cute. But yeah, so tell me one more time the question, is because I was thinking about how that was related to Wendy.
Well, no, I didn't know if you had tried to find a woman who had had a teen mom experience as you were casting, or if that was something that just kind of came up through the process of finding this particular individual, because her experience struck me about how the challenges might be different across motherhood in different stages of life, but there are still all of these challenges, even though she had been a teen mom. And now is trying to experience motherhood in a different way.
Yeah, Wendy was a hard one in that regard because she was, first of all, when you film, like there's a lot that comes out in these interviews, and one of the big takeaways with her was the reason why she had to advocate so much for herself in this film. And we didn't cover this in the film, but she had to switch her OBGYN even towards, like, I think the second, almost the third trimester of her pregnancy with
Wow.
yeah, because she was being like, I think the doctor had made her high risk, which then what she, it was just complicated because then you have to have a certain kind of pregnancy. And we won't get into all that here, but it changes your birth experience if you're high risk, and are you really high risk? And if she could, if the doula can advocate for her, you won't just be told you're high risk. You can ask better questions, try to understand, what does that mean? What does that mean for my next birth if I family plan and have another child? But with Wendy, she really opened up more about her mom passing, and that was the hardest part. I mean, we all cried in that interview because she was just so upset, and she could tell she had a lot of anxiety around not having her mother. And that's where the intergenerational advocacy, or advocates, I should say, are so important. And there's
Mm.
no, when you lose that support, your pregnancy is very different. And I think she was learning how to advocate for herself, and learning also through Alexis, her doula. And I think that was really, showed in the film. But we didn't go into her mom passing and everything, but she mentions it. She's like, now that I'm not going to have my mom with this pregnancy. But it really,
Wow. I mean, the access to mental health care is kind of brought up as a underscores the whole film. Um, and I mean, while this film was about Arkansas, I was looking at Massachusetts data recently, and it was showing that the leading cause of maternal deaths, so this is deaths from pregnant women through women 1 year after pregnancy, is how they kind of look at it. And the leading cause of deaths in Massachusetts, which is, exalted as this like beacon of healthcare, is overdoses. that are often, tied to mental health problems. And Dr. Nirvana Manning, I think it was, she mentions that the access to mental health care is this national issue. Um, and I'm curious, like, given the challenges accessing mental health care, even outside of um, postpartum, even outside of maternal health care, um, how how the women were able to kind of overcome those challenges and get the care that they needed. I mean, because it's such a broad issue, there's such a dearth of providers. I mean, does it get back to that advocacy, that need for advocacy, or um, are there things that Every Mother Counts is trying to do to kind of increase access generally to mental health care services?
I think in Arkansas specifically, they were trying to pass some legislation around the mental health postpartum. I don't think it's been successful, but it was like on the table on the floor.
Interesting.
And I think, Every Mother Counts would know a lot more about where that's at, and so would the state. You can always, by the way, you can always email me, Nicole at Nicole McKinley Hahn. My name's there, or we can pass along questions to Every Mother Counts if it's that specific. Because I'm not an expert on the maternal health, but I can in the legislation. Um,
But the
but
women in this film, had they connected with mental health prior, or was it their support networks that were able to connect them? How did they overcome that barrier?
I wouldn't say that in the time of filming, they hadn't overcome. Like, it was raw and happening. Ashley had a lot of anxiety. She was really confused about whether she should be on her meds or off her meds, or, antidepressant medications, and how,
Mm.
it would affect her pregnancy. So of course she was kind of trying to navigate that on her own. The best, I think, was sometimes being a filmmaker, you're like a social worker with a camera. And, maybe everyone is now with their iPhones or eye cameras, mobile cameras. Putting attention towards anyone and having a conversation is like therapy in itself. So I think the
Mm.
attention, it was helpful. Also, there was tons of resources sent to Ashley about the issues she was facing. So, I don't know, when you don't have that kind of access, what you're doing. I mean, are you asking your sister? Are you asking your parents? And that, for someone like Ashley, who's a young mom, navigating her first pregnancy and dealing with mental health issues, she didn't even, I think she speaks to it pretty clearly, that she was devastated by her anxiety, and didn't think she was going to be able to be a mom. Uh, yeah, so I think that's interesting that you asked that, because I thought it was interesting that she worked in a state park in Arkansas is the natural state, and it's beautiful. And where I live in New York City, I have nature deficit disorder. That's a real thing.
Really?
And here,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people who don't get enough nature time. It's a real issue, and so I really wanted in this film to show too how just having the access to nature and might also be some sort of part of your plan, your actual like wellness plan, especially
Mhm.
during your pregnancy. So everyone mentions it just naturally in the interviews, like, well, I live in Arkansas in the natural state, and so some women practice grounding, where they make sure they walk through the grass barefoot. And that's what I think Tynesha speaks to it. She has her self-care Saturdays. It's kind of like her way of finding her own time and taking care of herself. Uh, and I think Ashley was, so she was so open and willing to share, and that made it easy to tell her story. But I don't know, beyond like us and our film crew and checking in on her, and I did do a few like Zoom sessions after we were there. But I do think, getting her in nature, and how we open the film with her and the turtle, Johnny the turtle, because I think it's just shows you how it just relaxed her.
Mm.
Even to be on camera, she wanted to interact with the turtle and talk about the turtle first, and I think that was a good metaphor for finding some kind of mental relaxation technique.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring up Ashley too, because like I mean, while she talks about, having this anxiety and challenging struggles with mental health, I had assumed because she had talked about taking medication for depression that she had established some kind of connection with a provider who was giving her a prescription. And so in my head, I was like, well, if she's got that connection, maybe that is enough to monitor her, have these conversations. But from what you're saying, like it wasn't sufficient. That previous connection, she wasn't able to utilize that moving forward to answer these questions or to resolve some of the ongoing challenges. Like that's striking to me that even for someone who has engaged with mental health care in the past, has overcome all the hurdles to get a medication for their mental health challenges, that wasn't enough to help them in that moment.
Yeah, she was um, definitely, probably had been advised. I don't know exactly what her practitioner told her around her medications, but she was advised, I think, not to take them during her pregnancy.
Hmm.
For all reasons makes sense. But she was more torn about whether she should go back on them, which was this is the postpartum. This can open up a flood of issues and complications around, the six, not just the 6 weeks after giving birth, but the year after giving birth, all these decisions that you have to make, like, okay, I was on medications, now I've been off them for 9 months. Do I have to go back on them? And you're trying to, not that, yes, the doctor can tell you what to do, but as you know, it's still up to you to like
Hmm.
advocate for yourself and know what you need. And I think she did end up going back on them. So, that was I think that was, just so the viewers know. But yeah, it's not one, like for you, do you now that I don't know how long since you've given birth, has it been for you?
7 years, my goodness, she's already 7. Isn't that
Wow.
insane? I know.
Was it harder, like, because sometimes was it harder towards when it got closer to a year to 2 years after, or did it get easier for you?
Um, every I don't know. The thing about motherhood that I've experienced is that like it is always challenging, but in different ways. Like everyone says, like, oh, just wait, till they're till the terrible twos or the terrible threes, or wait till they're a four-ager, or it'll get easier when they're in school or when they're doing this. I mean, the challenges kind of are always present. But you do, as at least in my experience, you start to get more confident in the decisions you make as a parent. You fall into a routine. Um, and for me, the most helpful thing, and this kind of goes back to what's kind of saved me in that postpartum period, is supports. I have an incredible neighborhood of other moms who tell me when there's camp for the every other week there's some 4-day week. And so even just like the challenge of figuring out like, who's providing childcare, who's getting her off the bus, all of that is so helped by having a broader support network. And so that was true for me in the postpartum period and continues to be true for me now. I also, I mean, we're running out of time, but I wanted to talk to you too about the racial dynamics of some of these challenges, because the film touches upon these. It showcases several Black moms, and while a lot of these issues are kind of universally felt, they are disproportionately felt by women of color. Again, I was looking at these Massachusetts stats, and the most recent data showed that Black non-Hispanic women had the highest pregnancy-related mortality rate, which was double those of white women. And then in the film, one mom said, of her birthing experience, like she didn't feel safe. She didn't feel like she mattered at the time. Another woman talked about the distrust she had of providers. And so I'm curious if how those women were able to grapple with those challenges, if they were able to overcome them, or if the kind of racial dynamics and the distrust and the challenges of being Black women in particular, if that was just another thing they had to manage through in this postpartum period.
Mm. Yeah, well, first of all, that in the Arkansas film, for example, I mean, this is the question is for all films, but in Arkansas, Dr. Zenobia Harris speaks a lot to the issues of just the disparities and in marginalized communities, and the lack of access, how the environmental factors. I wouldn't know all the statistics like you do between all the different racial
Well,
groups.
I looked them up. I did, but
Amazing.
yeah, but I don't know if the women themselves if they spoke to this, if this was something that came up, how this challenge presented to the individual women you spoke to and how they grappled with it.
They all did. I mean, definitely, like, even though Ashley is white and you would think like she would be better off in, statistically in the state, but since she was so rural and she's in Nashville, Arkansas, which is pretty far from Little Rock, it's like 3 hours. It's 4 hours maybe. It was far.
Wow.
She was actually the most isolated and seemed the worst off to me. And it was interesting because the other two moms had a lot of support. They're definitely going through, one was definitely talking to her practitioner. I don't think we covered it in this film, but her practitioner was not being helpful. And there was racial concerns in that regard of like, was she being stigmatized, being told she was high risk because she was Black? That's always, it was just sort of like, the mom is also navigating the racial disparities and trying to, there's this term called weathering, which is, just all the things that the Black community is going through. And I think some of them, Dr. Harris talks about it quite a bit, but and Dr. Harris had such a great story. Like I think I'd have to go back and review it because it's not in the film, but like she just had so many stories, to be honest, that everyone was just like, wow, if you could look her up, any of her Zooms or talks are great. It's the Arkansas Birthing Project.
Mm. I mean, there are so many issues. We've only, scratched the surface of talking about some of them here. Um, I'm curious, like where do we go from here? Where do we begin? Like of all the issues that you uncovered and addressed, I'm curious if you have thoughts on what the low-hanging fruit might be, if there is something obvious, or where Every Mother Counts has focused their energy onto kind of what the next steps are.
Hmm. There's a lot. Well, I mean, I don't know their specific missioning for where they are like today, but I can tell you that they have a film, like a program, not a film, I mean a program about running, and you can like run. That's one way, there's ways for people, you can raise money and support the maternal health issues through running. You can obviously have your own screening and screen the film and have like small group talks about it. There's toolkits on their websites. I mean, there's tons of great guides and information on everymotheraccounts.org. And then there's also other films outside of our organization that or the organization that cover so many issues about maternal health that I think are really interesting. So I think there's the best way to answer your question is to reach out to whoever first, like in your community. If there's someone that is pregnant in your life. Could be a friend, could be a cousin, could be, someone close to you. Ask them if they need, you know, a ride to their doctor appointment, or, something as similar as like, as simple as just being like there for them, because it's a lot and there's just so much to navigate for a new mom, especially. And yeah, the pregnancy. And then also what hopefully this film, I think, opens some people's minds to, is that, hey, just because you've gotten through birth, and even it's 3 months after the birth, like check in on that mom, check in on your loved one, like, make sure she, in the Marshallese community, and they don't let, this is like their culture, they don't let the moms alone after birth. Like they make sure someone's around them all the time, because just through thousands of years of their culture, they understand that like moms get really depressed, and that you're not supposed to be alone. And we live in a culture of like this in America now, where it's so individualized and we're so isolated, and a lot of moms are home alone and many days and have very little interaction. So even just, Alexis says it in the film, one of the doulas, just asking that mother, like, how your day is, and stopping by or calling them for 15 minutes is like, she says it, she's like, oh, it's just to have like a conversation is so good. So, that would be the first thing I would hope people take away. And as you said, the low hanging fruit, I think that's the
Mm.
easiest.
That's excellent. Well, all of you that are watching here today have already taken that first step by making yourself more aware of some of the issues and about the organization that is kind of at the forefront of this work. So the film is Giving Birth in America, Arkansas. It's one of so far 7 in a series of films by Every Mother Counts, directed by Nicole McKinley Hahn and produced by Lindsay Cordero. Nicole, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us, for your work as a filmmaker, and for the discussion. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, and for sharing your personal, story about being a mom and your birth experience. It means a lot to everyone, and thank you everyone for joining.
Excellent. Thank you so much.